So friends, how are you? Let's continue our discussion and move the story forward from where we left off. At this point in history, the arrival and continued presence of American forces in Saudi Arabia had started creating serious and complex problems for the kingdom. These problems were not just limited to one area. They were economic, political, and most importantly, social in nature. Now the question is, what exactly were these problems? First of all, let's talk about the economic impact. The Gulf War, especially the Iraq-Kuwait conflict, had already placed a massive financial burden on the region. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other Gulf states had collectively spent around $35 billion on the war effort. This was an enormous amount, even for oil-rich economies. But the financial strain didn't end with the war. In fact, after the war ended, Saudi Arabia had to increase its defense spending even further. Why? Because now it felt vulnerable. The leadership believed that in order to secure the country from future threats, it needed to modernize its military, purchase advanced weapons, and strengthen its defense systems. All of this required huge amounts of money. As a result, the Saudi economy began to feel the pressure. Despite being one of the richest oil-producing nations in the world, Saudi Arabia faced such severe financial strain that it had to consider taking foreign loans. This was something quite unusual for a country that had long been seen as financially powerful and self-sufficient. However, as serious as the economic damage was, the social consequences were even more dangerous. The root of this social unrest lay in a broken promise. After the Gulf War, U.S. President George H.W. Bush had made a written agreement that American forces would eventually withdraw from Saudi Arabia. Initially, it seemed like this promise was being fulfilled. By May 1991, all coalition forces, except the United States, had left Saudi Arabia and returned to their respective countries. But the American forces stayed. Around 37,000 U.S. soldiers were still stationed in Saudi Arabia. Not only that, but their presence was highly visible and strategically placed. Near Riyadh, at a distance of about 80 kilometers, in the Al-Kharj region, the Prince Sultan Air Base had become a major hub for American military operations. Fighter jets were stationed there, ready to take off at any time. Now, this raised a serious question in the minds of the Saudi people. Why was America not leaving? The United States provided a justification. According to American officials, their military presence was necessary to enforce a no-fly zone over Iraq. This meant that Iraqi aircraft were not allowed to operate in certain parts of their own airspace. If they attempted to do so, American fighter jets would intercept and potentially shoot them down. From a strategic point of view, this was part of a broader effort to control Saddam Hussein and ensure that Iraq complied with international demands. Weapons inspectors had been sent into Iraq to locate and dismantle facilities related to weapons of mass destruction. The U.S. claimed that its forces in Saudi Arabia were there to support these inspectors and maintain pressure on the Iraqi regime. But this explanation did not convince the Saudi public. For ordinary citizens, the presence of foreign troops, especially non-Muslim troops on Saudi soil, was deeply uncomfortable and unacceptable. Saudi Arabia is home to Islam's holiest cities, and many people saw the continued presence of American forces as a violation of religious and national sovereignty. As a result, public anger began to grow. People started demanding that American troops leave the country. However, there was a major problem. The United States had no immediate intention of withdrawing its forces, and the Saudi government itself was not making any strong effort to push them out. This created a gap, a growing divide between the government and the people. For the first time in Saudi Arabia's modern history, criticism of the royal family began to emerge openly. Previously, such discussions were either limited to private conversations or expressed indirectly by external actors like Iran or certain Shia groups within the country. But now, things were changing. Ordinary Saudi citizens began talking about reform, change, and even revolution. This shift in mindset was not limited to civilians alone. Even within the Saudi military, signs of dissent started to appear. Secret pamphlets criticizing the royal family were being circulated. These pamphlets questioned the policies of the leadership and highlighted issues like corruption and inequality. criticism of the royal elite became more common. People started discussing the luxurious lifestyles of princes, the extravagant parties held in embassies, and the widespread corruption among high-ranking officials. These were topics that had previously been considered taboo. Among the most influential voices in this movement were two prominent scholars, Salman al-Odah and Safar al-Hawali. These scholars had already opposed the religious justification that allowed American troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia. Now they stepped into the public arena more openly. Safar al-Hawali, in particular, began distributing recorded messages among his followers. In these messages, he argued that the events in the Gulf were part of a larger American agenda to dominate the Arab and Islamic world. He also used his Friday sermons to openly criticize both the Saudi leadership and the United States. This was a direct challenge to the state. In response, the government took action. On May 17, 1991, Salman al-Odah was banned from delivering Friday sermons. This decision sparked immediate backlash. Just 2 days later, thousands of his supporters took to the streets in the city of Buraidah. The protests quickly escalated. The Saudi National Guard intervened and used force to disperse the crowd. Many people were arrested, and the movement was temporarily suppressed. However, the incident had already sent a powerful message. Public dissent was no longer hidden. Interestingly, Sheikh Ibn Baz, who had initially supported the presence of American forces, later showed sympathy towards Salman al-Odah. This indicated that even within the religious establishment there were divisions. As the situation evolved, the opposition became more organized. A group called the Committee for the Defense of Legitimate Rights, CDLR, was formed. This was the first formal opposition organization in Saudi Arabia. It demanded democracy, human rights, and political participation. The group even called for general elections, something completely unheard of in Saudi political culture at the time. The government saw this as a serious threat. Leaders of the movement, including Mohammed al-Masari, were arrested. After being released, al-Masari left Saudi Arabia and moved to the United Kingdom. From there, he continued his activism using fax machines, sending reports, exposing corruption, and spreading information back into Saudi Arabia. This was a new kind of resistance. In response, the Saudi government launched a crackdown. Around 200 individuals, including Salman al-Odah and Safar al-Hawali, were imprisoned. At the same time, organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood began criticizing Saudi Arabia's alliance with non-Muslim powers. This led the Saudi government to reduce financial support to these groups. Despite all these measures, the underlying tensions in Saudi society did not disappear. Meanwhile, religious scholars presented King Fahd with a list of demands. These included anti-corruption reforms, improvements in the judicial system, and the implementation of Islamic principles in governance. King Fahd responded by introducing reforms in 1992. He announced the country's first basic law, which outlined the framework of governance. It declared the Quran and Sunnah as the foundation of legislation. It also established a consultative council, known as the Majlis al-Shura, consisting of 60 members. However, this council had no real authority. It could only provide advice, while all major decisions remained in the hands of the king. Many people saw this as a symbolic move rather than genuine reform. As a result, opposition groups remained dissatisfied. When peaceful movements were suppressed, some individuals chose a more dangerous path: armed resistance. One of the most prominent figures to emerge during this time was Osama bin Laden. He strongly criticized the Saudi leadership, accusing them of betraying Islam by aligning with Western powers. Over time, his organization, al-Qaeda, began to grow stronger and more organized. Facing multiple challenges, King Fahd took additional steps. He attempted to improve relations with the Shia community within Saudi Arabia. This community had supported the government during the Gulf War and had largely abandoned revolutionary ambitions. Through diplomatic efforts, relations with Iran also began to improve. Under the leadership of Akbar Hashemi Rafsanji, Iran pursued a more moderate and pragmatic foreign policy. Diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran were restored, and cooperation during Hajj improved. Iranian pilgrims were given more facilities, and tensions during religious gatherings decreased. However, full trust between the two countries never developed. Saudi Arabia was willing to improve relations with Iran, but not at the cost of its alliance with the United States. When Iran proposed that Gulf security should be managed by Muslim countries instead of the United States, Saudi Arabia rejected the idea. This decision highlighted a deeper reality. Despite all efforts towards unity, the region remained divided. Political interests, strategic alliances, and mutual distrust continued to shape relationships. And then, just as things seemed to be stabilizing, a shocking event occurred. In 1996, a devastating explosion took place in Saudi Arabia. Initially, it was believed that al-Qaeda was responsible. However, later investigations suggested that another group was behind the attack. This incident once again changed the dynamics of the region. It brought many Muslim countries closer to the United States, while also deepening divisions within the Muslim world. The hope that the early 1990s had created, the hope of unity and cooperation, was shattered once again. And this raises an important question. What exactly happened in that incident? Who was truly behind it, and why did it have such a powerful impact? We will explore all of that in the next episode.